731. Standing Committee of Housing and Human Welfare, Housing and Community Development Committees. To my right is Alderman Jared Lippman. My left is Alderman Joe Budge. Staff, Ms. Cindy Gaines, Ms. Teresa Wellman, and our newest hero, Mr. Pete Gottwald. And the first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the June 13th meeting.
Mr. Chair, I move for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and approved. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same sign. The ayes have it. Let the record reflect. Minutes approved unanimously. We're going to take the agenda a little bit out of order, if it's okay. I'd like to ask that we have the general discussion ID-267-17, which concerns the deed for 40 Clay Street. I'd like to do that item first, if my colleagues will move. Okay. Okay, so we shall do that first. I don't know, Ms. Brown, if you and council want to take the table, if there's anything you want to say to us, or perhaps Ms. Wellman will just lay it out, and we'll go ahead and get this done.
I'll leave it up to you. That'd be great.
If you so choose, be my guest.
I don't know how much you already discussed the issue, so you know what's going on.
Yes. Yes, I'm very familiar with the property. My colleagues may not. I'm a native of that area of the city. Grew up in that area of the city, so I understand. My colleagues may not.
And it's also worthwhile noting that our sessions are televised and recorded, so on City TV and the cable network. So it's but it's for the benefit of the public who may be watching. It's worth a brief summary.
And please identify yourself for the record.
Sure. My name is Kiernan Waters, and I'm an estate planning attorney representing my client, Gloria Brown. In my work with Mrs. Brown as her estate planning attorney, preparing some estate planning documents for her, we're creating a revocable living trust, and essentially I was just trying to deed her property at 40 Clay Street into her trust. But in our researching of the deed, there is a covenant or a restriction in the deed that we wanted to address. And this deed, or the property, was purchased by my client in 1976 from the Annapolis Urban Renewal Authority, which was a program that was working with the Federal Housing and Urban Development Committee, or Department. And part of the deed, when my client purchased it as a vacant lot, was that the restriction on the deed could not be disposed of. She couldn't dispose of the property until she had built a business construction on the land there. But things happened, and my client certainly built the construction there, and then she's been running a business on that, what was the vacant plot of land for the last 40 years or so. But the Urban Renewal Authority never certified that those improvements or the construction had been satisfied. And without their satisfaction, the deed says we can't do anything with the property now. Can't deed it into her trust or deed it anywhere. So she's very limited in what she can do and the power she has over the property. And what we're asking the city to do, now that the Urban Renewal Development Authority was shut down back in the 80s, is basically just sign off that the property is my client's and that she can do what she wants with it at this point, as she has satisfied those restrictions in the deed.
So basically what we did was we looked up in, Ashley looked up in the city code, and it appears that the Housing and Community Development Committee has the powers of the Urban Renewal Authority and therefore can sign off on this. I did inspect to make sure that there was a building on the property, and so they've met the requirements of the restriction, and there's a document in your packet for you to sign. We'll have to get it notarized, so it'll have to be, but they've met the requirements, and it's up to the committee to sign off on this.
Mr. Chair, I've read the explanation that we had in advance, and I've heard the explanation today. I have no further questions. I have no problem with moving favorably for the committee to endorse the satisfaction of the deed requirements.
Is that a motion?
That is.
I will second the motion and add that I had a chance to review the documents. They seem in order to me. I am gratified to see that the acting city attorney has signed off on this. And I note that the city has no financial interest in the properties or in the transaction. So it is perfectly appropriate for us to sign off on it as a no-fee transaction or a no-fee approval.
Okay, so it's been moved and properly second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work you've done to help me get here. And I'm a
Welcome.
notary if you want, I can notarize that.
Oh, you are? Oh. Well, the gentleman right there, Mr. Alderman, he's the chair, so he gets to sign.
Oh, you're a notary?
She's a notary.
Oh,
Do
man,
do
you
have any
came
objections?
prepared.
We'll just
Yeah.
go ahead and...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you came very much prepared.
What were the improvements that had been done? Okay.
Mhm.
Right.
This needs, at least if we're looking at the same document, it needs to be signed by the city clerk and the mayor,
Regina and Dan.
and the city attorney, and the city manager.
Hmm.
I've seen some of them signatures on it. Yeah, because Regina's a notary also.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, is this, I read through Alan's letter. Thanks for sending that. I guess thanks for getting it added.
Yeah.
Is this the only change you're making as
The only change I'm making, yes. Mr. Chair, are we? Okay.
Okay, the next item before the committee is legislation before the committee, 0-32-17, Marley Price dwelling units. For the purpose that the construction of Marley Price dwelling units is consistent with the community limiting fees in lieu of constructing Marley Price dwelling units and improving sales of Marley Price dwelling units. You should have in front of you one proposed amendment by Alderman Budge. Mr. Gutwell, I'd like to thank you in advance for your diligence in working this matter out. So, thanks. Alderman Budge?
Certainly, thank you. And I would also like to thank Ms. Wellman for the hard work that she's put into this ordinance. The ordinance, from my perspective, tries to accomplish four things. One is we tried to clarify a lot of the language in the MPDU chapter, because once I got into some of the language on the sales and marketing process. I couldn't really understand what was going on, so I spent a lot of time interviewing Ms. Wellman, saying, so how does this work really? And then trying to translate that into English in the code. And as part of that, we also there were a number of things in the definitions where the standards and requirements for MPDU qualification and so forth were listed as part of the definition, and moved those down into the body of the code, which is, any definition that includes the verb shall is is suspect in my book, and so I cleaned that up. So it was that kind of cleanup. Then we addressed some specific points that either I felt or Planning and Zoning felt needed to be addressed. One is we had seen in the past that MPDUs were developed that were wildly different than the than units in the same development. Sailor's Quay it was the poster child for this, where the developer had taken the same exterior look and feel of the MPDU and run a wall down the middle, so it turned it into two MPDUs that were half size. And it took forever for him to market that. So there's language in here that says the MPDUs have to be of similar floor size to the rest of, to the surrounding units. Secondly, we had a development come through in Ward 1 that was a fee in lieu development, and the developer was claiming a density bonus, and my reaction was, what? And, how do you get a density bonus for building MPDUs if you're not building MPDUs? And I thought the language was kind of clear. There's a chapter called Conformance, and it talks about building MPDUs and stuff, but apparently not. In a previous director of planning and zoning and a previous city attorney had decided that if you paid a fee in lieu, you got a density bonus. So I added language in here to make that as unequivocal as possible. And then we added some of planning and zoning favorite hits. The fee in lieu they felt was not sufficiently substantial, so they suggested that at present it's 4% of the building permit, and the suggestion, which is included in here, is that it be 4% of the building permit plus the grading permit. And then the final significant change is up in the early part of the legislation. It describes an expedited process. If you build enough, if your MPDUs are part of your project, there's an expedited approval process that's mentioned. In practice, the city doesn't have such a beast. And we have never tried to implement it. We've never tried to do an expedited approval process for MPDUs. So that's removed. And I look quizzically at our colleagues at Planning and Zoning, saying, "Do you have it? Did I miss anything big?" So that's what we have going on here in the basic legislation. The amendment that I am proposing is basically a grandfather clause for existing projects that are in the P&Z pipeline. If application has been made to Planning and Zoning before the date that this legislation is effective, is approved by the council, then the application will be judged by the law that's in effect now, essentially. And only new applications will be judged by this after the date of implementation. Now, that's in terms of approving the application. In terms of governing how MPDUs work, the 10-year period for rentals, it has to stay for resale, and it has to stay in MPDU, and all that language that gets clarified goes with the new language for all MPDUs.
Mr. Chair?
Alderman Edmonds.
I'm done.
Thank you, Alderman Budge. I think, as is your custom, you do a thorough job on legislation. I'm always impressed with the job that you do, going through everything so carefully. I just have a few questions. One, I'm curious why Mr. Gutwald is the new hero, and if that has anything to do with this legislation. Why he started the meeting saying that you're his new hero, and I didn't know what that was in relation to, and wondering if it has to do with this or
No, he's the city's new hero.
the city's new hero.
He's recently passed some legislation which made him stand out front and center in the city.
Okay.
He's rendered some decisions. He's a little big man now.
Oh, that legislation. Gotcha. All right, now I'm with you. All right. Perhaps working backwards on the legislation, Alderman Budge, I noticed, and I certainly support the intent of it, but I'm wondering, after our experience trying to figure out what approved means in FCA context, I don't know that it provides any value here, and I'm wondering if the amendment wouldn't just read better and be more clear if we just say that any development application submitted prior to the effective date of this ordinance shall be evaluated based on Chapter 20.30 as it existed at the time of the application.
That's fine by me.
And just take out the two references to approved. So I would strike...
So strike but not yet approved?
Correct. And then and approved a few words later. I remember going through this in the context of the FCA saying, does it force you to approve something then? Because what if you don't want to approve it?
Your suggestions are fine with me.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's all I have on that amendment. Looking at the legislation itself, like I said, I could tell it took a lot of work to get where you landed, and I think your changes make sense to me. I'm now looking at the attachment, the Alan Hyatt email, and I would just like some guidance to make sure I understand his questions and whether it makes sense to not respond. So the first part of his email has to do with what you just covered. So I'm going to move down to the paragraph that begins next. It is unclear to me whether O3217, that paragraph.
Yes.
Can either Mr. Gutwald or Alderman Budge or Teresa, Ms. Wellman, can you all help me understand what this paragraph is trying to tell me, us?
What Mr. Allen is getting at is that there's when you achieve a 20%, or when you achieve the density bonus, you can option for a 20% tolerance on height, bulk, and setbacks, I believe it is. So he was wondering whether that impacts that tolerance. Because you're getting the density bonus, the bulk regulations are relieved by 20%, if you will. And no, this bill has no impact on that whatsoever. We didn't touch that. All Alderman Budge was doing was establishing the fact that you can't just pay a fee in lieu of and then still get the density bonus.
Sure. and that certainly makes sense. Okay. So that paragraph that he raises concern, you don't think it's a concern that really exists?
Correct.
Okay. And I think that applies to the next paragraph. And then, all right. Oh, so his concern that the language is vague regarding similar floor area to market unit rates. Any concerns that you would have trouble implementing that?
No,
for vagueness?
I think it's pretty clear what that means. I think it was clear before, and Alderman Budge again just wanted to make it even clearer, if you will. I mean, what was done in the past has not happened since. We've learned our lesson, so that is not going to happen again, what happened in Sailor's Key. So, at least from my perspective, and I think from Ella's staff, would not allow, that shouldn't have been happening anyways, but this just made it even more precise, if you will, to the intent of it can't be a substandard unit
Right.
being offered for moderately priced dwelling units.
Makes sense to me.
It's kind of, it's stated there already, but this just cleans it up. So I don't know why it's vague. I don't know how it was vague before, but anyways.
Okay. The next the paragraph that starts, I would also question whether the bill is seeking to correct a problem that doesn't exist. I think between everything that you've all said, I think clearly a problem has existed, and so
Yes.
this legislation
Cleans
does
it.
some correcting, so I don't have a problem with that.
I would add just one thing to everything that Alderman Budge said, was that it also codifies some things that we were doing by practice. I mean, because it references resales and it doesn't even mention rentals. So we just cleaned that up, and
Okay.
we were already doing that by practice, even though the code was silent to it. So
Okay. And then, let's see, his finally comment. Finally, O3217 would increase the fee in lieu amount by adding the requirement that developers pay 40% of grading permit costs in addition to 4% of construction costs. This is a considerable fee increase. So let's start with that premise. Is it a considerable fee increase?
depending upon the project, it could be, yeah.
Okay.
And
so help me understand the rationale for increasing the fee?
Well, the rationale is that the idea is that the fee in lieu is supposed to give us money to replace the product that they're, something that they're not going to provide.
Okay.
So from our experiences, it wasn't that 4% of just the building costs of the building permit. Doesn't talk about all the other costs that are associated with constructing a house. So we couldn't quite, we worked on this a little bit, talking to some of the, building folks. What could we use as an assessment? Because it's just the construction costs, not engineering, not planning, not any of those other costs associated with it. So we added the grading permit because that is at a minimum of the things to construct a dwelling unit on another property or acquire one to put into the home assistance program.
Is there
So-
good reason to allow fee in lieu at all?
Well, there are probably situations where it's a smaller development that it would be appropriate, but larger developments, it's like anything else with like FCA. I'm going to force you to put it on the site. It's going to have to be there's no way out of this kind of thing.
So you're in favor of keeping fee in lieu as an
Sure, I don't
option?
have a problem with that. I just think it's going to be applicable to something that's a 10-lot subdivision. Well, it has to be more than 11 lots anyways, but, when you're talking about a 15, 20-lot subdivision, it might be appropriate.
As opposed to paying the fee, I think that
I'm all in favor of having a high enough fee in lieu to really encourage the not
build,
needing
right.
the fee.
yeah, we need affordable housing.
Yeah. Ms. Wellman, did you have some comments on the fee in lieu comment?
I just wanted to say that since I'm probably the only one here, except for maybe Cindy, that was around when the original legislation was done, the intent of that fee was to include all costs.
Okay. And do you feel comfortable that with the additional costs that the amount in a fee in lieu would actually be enough to, what would you do with that money? Would you actually seek to subsidize different housing?
Well, there's several things that you can do. There's a whole laundry list in the code of what you can do with the money, but basically what we've done in the past is we've used it for settlement expenses and down payment costs for people that are buying like Habitat or one of the acquisition rehabs that we've done with.
Okay. Is that a grant program? How does that work?
What we did with, there were 10 houses constructed on Clay Street, and we used a combination of this money and something called home money, which is state money, to provide soft second mortgages so people could afford to buy the houses.
Interesting. Okay. All right. And then going to his last point, code provides that the fees go into the city's homeownership assistance trust fund. I'm unaware of the breakdown of percentages between expenditures, and to put that in the code, and those put code funds for administrative and so on. You all have it in front of you as well. I won't continue reading it. Can you address his points in this paragraph, please?
Currently, the administrative costs that we're using the fund for now is to pay Arundel Community Development Services to evaluate the clients and make sure that they're eligible, since we lost staff that did that back in, like I said, we've used it for soft second mortgages. There really isn't that much in there. So we're, you know, gonna have to, as the fees come in, there'll be probably, a good amount of money, and then we can develop a program. So,
Okay.
let's see, what else?
I'm satisfied.
Okay.
These questions are answered to my satisfaction at least. I think, like I said, I think this is good legislation. I think it's a tedious effort, and that I'm glad someone else did. And I'm glad it's done, and I'm happy to support this legislation. The only reason I'm not asking to be a sponsor is because it's not my work, and I don't want to pretend that it was. But I think it's good legislation. I'm happy to support it in committee and council, barring some convincing argument that Mr. Hyatt has yet to present.
Thank you.
So, 03217, Amendment 1 as amended. All in
So
favor?
moved, yeah, okay.
Second.
All opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. So,
Mr. Chair, I move that we recommend to the full council 03217 with amendment number 1 as revised.
Second?
all in favor, aye?
Aye.
So, the ayes have it. 03217 goes to the full council as amended.
Great.
Thank you. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Not unless you were intending to give a crown to Mr. Gutwald to go with his, or
I'd like you to hang around for a minute.
is it a cape that you wanted to give him, or a crown? I'm not sure.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Meeting's adjourned.
All right, see you tomorrow at 1:30.